Welcome to this video. It is on the MIDI Guitar 2 and Kontakt 7, and is there a reason for you to buy it? Should you upgrade if you're on 5 or 6? Is it any good for MIDI Guitar 2? These are some of the questions that I'm going to be answering in this video. So I got the Kontakt 7 as a part of my paying 200 euros to upgrade to Komplete 14, and would it have not been for some standout instruments that I knew that I wanted? I would really have felt disappointed is an understatement. You tend to get that feeling that somehow you're buying into a brand more than you're buying into the actual product when you're upgrading to this Komplete series from Native Instruments. The feeling of being left out for me really appears when I open up my new Komplete 14 and I get libraries that are curated towards the bedroom hip-hoppers. And not only the bedroom hip-hoppers of the world, but the specific genre of bedroom hip-hoppers that are interested in transatlantic drill drip. I mean, come on, what's that? I don't know. My interest lies elsewhere, but what I would want from Native Instruments is actually to broaden their scopes to include more types of controllers to their environment. They have Kontakt and claim themselves it's the latest evolution of our flagship instrument platform, now with an enhanced browser and an overhauled factory library. Then I read about it. This is the do-it-all instrument platform. Okay, then my interest is piqued. The do-it-all platform, I'm starting to think, okay, now I can use it for MPE practices and I can use it for my MIDI guitar. Perhaps I don't need to go in and change every sort of parameter to get every sort of instrument to work with my specific setup. Kontakt is everything from instant inspiration for music makers to the industry's leading instrument building tool. Okay, so if it's the industry's leading instrument building tool, perhaps it is. They do have some great instruments that are coming in from third parties from years ago. Sample modelings, the Trumpet is one of those gold standard for me when it comes to emotionally connecting with an instrument, which I think is sort of an indication of it's a really good crafted instrument. And it works on the platform. So I know that instruments can work on the platform. So let me go through the library today and see what things do I need to change in sort of some or every or any of the instruments to work with a MIDI guitar setup. And let's evaluate afterwards, is Kontakt for or is it not for MIDI guitar as it is today? So let's start with the way it looks now. This is one of those things where they've talked about the improvement. So this is the view you'll meet the first time you open the software. You get this new layout of your libraries and you can sort of choose ways of categorizing these. The thing that actually worked for me more is this starring favorites system. If I go into some sort of instrument here, I can preview all these sounds. And if I like any one, or if it's a sound that I know I'm gonna use a lot, I can just click in the star here, and when I go up to favorites afterwards, I have that sound among my favorites and I can choose it from there instead. This is quite a good improvement. I'm probably gonna use this favorites way of choosing some presets that I'm going to keep for those instruments that I'm returning to often. More than that, I am probably not gonna hang around in this environment too much. If we go over to the standard environment, the thing that we're all used to, it looks like before. The next thing that the guys from Native Instruments think is a big thing, and it probably is for many of you that have invested in, say, new screens and stuff like this, so you perhaps can use this more, is the scalability. It's still only for those instruments that actually come with the Kontakt 7 library itself. So any third-party instruments will still show us these small containers. Wherever it was small buttons before, it is still, and it hasn't changed one bit for those. Let's go to the factory library. Here's the acoustic parts right away. This is the way that their own instruments appear, and if you choose some sort of legacy third-party instrument, of course you're gonna go back to the old way of seeing things. I'm gonna go into a DAW now. I'm going to play an instrument in the same way on the keyboard and on the MIDI guitar, and my hope for the future would be that Native Instruments speak to their developers and say that, okay, we want to make instruments that work for all kinds of controllers. I mean, if I'm using my EVI, I should be able to use my EVI straight off the bat. When I open Kontakt, I just want to be able to sort of choose that preset. The same would go for keyboard, C-board, or MIDI guitar, or whatever sort of controller that I have. I'm not saying that Native Instruments should stand for all the developing of those presets, but I want them to give that impression to the developers of instruments for them that that is important. Starting with the absolute first thing that comes up is the Bansuri flute. I have here a keyboard. Sometimes I go to the keyboard just to explain how things work there. This is what a Bansuri would sound like. The thing you hear right away is probably that I can at least use some sort of bends here, which means that the bend ranges are set to something, at least in this instrument. Anything related to the bend ranges, you have this little cogwheel up in the right corner, and in here you have stuff like pitch bend range, which in this case is set to 0.75. So what I need to do every time I open an instrument in Kontakt is, of course, to change its pitch bend range value to 2, both for up and down, so that it will follow any of my actions on the fretboard. Otherwise, any sort of bends or vibrato will not translate correctly. The other thing that you might want to look at is something like the velocity box here. You have different curves that you can choose from. A straight curve here, a linear curve, a exponential curve. That's the one I'm going to choose. It mitigates the difference between picked notes and legato notes and stuff like that. We have something like sound here. If you listen to how that behaves when I'm using the controller, you realize quite quickly that I couldn't assign my, say, breath or bite controller to this and use it as a live effect. This is probably more in the line of me choosing one of these sounds to work with as the sound that I'm going to use during the whole performance. There is a tremolo that I could sort of use my mod wheel to, and scripted tremolos. A straight up mathematical tremolo, it's not an emulation of a person playing an instrument. However you use this. sometimes differences are more apparent if you add a slight reverb to this, and I'm adding not so slight reverb. This is their Cathedral A. What parts of these kind of instruments do I have to be doing something about to be able to use it with my MIDI guitar setup initially? This was the first question I was asking. And of course, the pitch bend range was one of those things. Velocity is optional, of course. You perhaps need to do something to get a better sense of connection with the instrument. And what would it take to connect my breath controller to something like expression here, because we don't have an expression in these instruments. Then we go into automation, and we have host automation, and we have MIDI automation. We're into the MIDI part. I know that my breath controller, my breath part is connected to CC2, and my bite is connected to CC4. I can see those lighting up here as I use them. If I breathe into this one, you'll see a red indication here at CC2. And if I bite down on this, you'll see the same red at CC4. Using these simultaneously, you'll see both of them lighting up. So that was me breathing and biting. Say I want more noise connected to me biting down on this sensor. I just click learn here, decide what sort of function I want to assign. And now I want to use the bite. I bite down on this, and I click on the relevant knob. In this case, that would be the noise. And if you see the noise parameter here, it's connected to my biting. That's the way it should be, assigning some sort of MIDI controller value. The thing that I associate most with expression is, of course, the dynamic control, especially for wind instruments. So I can tell you right away, there aren't any expression controls. So we have to find something that would be working in the same way. If I go into effects now, I do have a limiter here with a gain and an output on it. So I'm going to click on the output. Great. But what happens with their own convolution reverb here? It's integrated into the instrument, so it comes before the limiter. So I'm actually cutting the reverb as well. So if I'm going to do this, I need to always put another reverb after the instrument itself. So I can't use Kontakt's own reverb and use the limiter as the expression controller. It's not a problem actually, because I always use my own reverb anyway. So this is sounding more like an instrument that I actually want to use for, say, performance purposes. If I want to demonstrate something that sounds something like a Bansuri flute, I could take this patch, slap on a reverb afterwards, and use the limiter as the dynamic controller, or the thing that I standardly would use breath for. Here we have something like the Duduk, and this is what it sounds like right out of the box. But if I sort of use my own version of it, I've changed the pitch bend range, I've looked at the velocity, gone into the FX and associated the output from the limiter to my breath control. This is what it would sound like. So these small things makes for a lot of difference in terms of playability, of course, but they need to be done, and it's a nuisance to have to go in and do that to all the instruments, resave them and save them as a preset of your own. It would solve itself by Native Instruments delivering each instrument with one MPE preset for every kind of instrument and one standard. That would be enough, actually. Some other category, we have the band category here. Go-to instruments are, of course, the saxophones. This is kind of special. A harmonize button here, making it possible for me to play chords, and I've associated that with the bite function here. So if I bite down and play at the same time, I will get a chord to play over. And that's, I think, a nice utilization of something like the bite sensor in the breath controller. It's even more useful in something like the sax section, of course, this harmonize function. Fun to play with, easy to do. It's just to go into the automation part here, and you can see that on CC2 I have limiter output, and on CC4 I have the harmonize here, and that's a harmonize function really, so it's either on or off depending on if I bite down on the sensor or not. This is one way to creatively use something like this. So I'm going into jazz upright. No, this is strange because the stand-up bass here is one of those instruments that actually sound nice when you open up the so you hear it sounds pretty good. The thing that stumps me, that boggles my mind every time I look at something like this, it's the pitch bend range is set to 0 in this case. Why wouldn't you want to have pitch bend associated with an instrument that is fretless to a great deal dependent on slides and stuff like that? So in my own preset, I have pitch bend set to 2, and I have the velocity changed as well. You see that I don't actually have anything assigned to this one with regard to the breath controller. So this is one of those instruments that you only need to do some small changes to and resave for it to work. Obviously an instrument that works with pitch bends. Why wouldn't you want to have that be used right away? Why do I need to go in and change stuff like this? Again, this is an argument for having at least 2 separate setups of presets for every kind of instrument. It's not like I'm not willing to go in and change these things, say my own presets, but if it's for every instrument, and perhaps you even can't change pitch bend ranges in some cases, you're sort of implying that you're not interested in developing libraries or instruments for other controllers than your particular keyboard with that particular setup. The upright bass, super easy instrument to work with. I do not have any complaints really, except for the strangeness of not having any pitch bend ranges associated with the instrument straight away. I'm not going to go into every kind of instrument in these. I mean, there are pianos and stuff, and you don't want to have any pitch bend, and you certainly don't need any breath control for that. So the pianos and stuff like that, you're going to have to go over yourselves. Let's go into the orchestral part. That could be interesting. These are the new orchestral part from Orchestral Tools. In this case, you have at least a dynamic mode. You can choose between velocity and the mod wheel. Now the dynamic mode is set to velocity, so depending on how hard I strike my strings, you will get a result from that. Since clarinet is a reed instrument, of course I would be interested in having these qualities that comes with me breathing into the breath controller and dynamically controlling it, so that I can sort of start at a very soft dynamic and go to something else. I'm gonna change my breath to send out a MIDI message for mod wheel instead. So this is like using the mod wheel for the dynamic control. Okay, so obviously I can control some part of the dynamics with my breath controller via this mod wheel setup, but I can't get it to close fully, which is one of those things that if you are used to controlling stuff with breath controller, you perhaps even strike a note at an earlier point and then breathe at that point where you want it to come in. So this is not full well what I'm looking for. I can do exactly the same thing with this one, where depending on how hard I strike the strings, is combined with the output from the limiter. You hear this difference in dynamic control. It's remarkable, actually. They don't consider clarinet to be an instrument that does pitch bends. Me, on the other hand, I do, so I give it a pitch bend value that's matching the one on my MIDI guitar setup. This is how I would set up to work with the clarinet from the Kontakt 7 library. And this doesn't sound particularly good, I would say. They have this legato function that makes the notes overlap. I didn't find it super realistic. I also can't use vibrato for pitch bend because it doesn't sound realistic. It sounds like a wobbly string. It doesn't really move like a vibrato should. But then again, a vibrato on a clarinet is more often, in the classical world at least, associated perhaps with the breath. So I don't have a mod wheel to control the vibrato either. The mod wheel is obviously only associated with the dynamic control here. So in Orchestral Tools world, vibrato isn't a thing for clarinet. Kinda makes me disappointed. I don't know. I would guess they have the same idea about something like Flute. Yeah, they have dynamics. They have the staccatissimo and sustains. And you obviously hear the difference in how they think that these notes are sounding in different articulations. So do I have vibrato here? I think I do. I guess they have a scripted vibrato on the flute. My guess is that it's gonna sound awkward when I try to use pitch vibrato. And granted, not all instruments are meant to use with pitch vibrato. It's actually a difference in tradition. I mean, in jazz, for instance, of course, they're much more pitch inclined. So I'm gonna just reload this. So yeah, they do have a scripted vibrato here. And if I change the pitch band range, you're kidding. They haven't connected the pitch band range to their instruments. Is this the case for all the orchestral tool stuff? I haven't checked this out before. I'm sorry. This is I mean, this is really disappointing if that's the case. In the Clarinet, they had the pitch band range associated. So this is a solo trumpet, and I guess that even in classical music and even in orchestral tools world, you should be able to bend a trumpet tone, right? Yeah. I'm not gonna bother with making presets on these. I'm so sorry. None of these are going to work. I guess I could use some percussion instruments from orchestral tools. Yeah. I've always thought that they had these nice sounding instruments, but I'm gonna check the oboe just for the fun of it. So they have this scripted vibrato here as well, so it makes me believe that this isn't going to work for this either. No, so this does work. How about the strings? It's not like it would make a difference because I don't think it's gonna sound nice. Because they already have some sort of tremolo on this. This sounds nice enough to work with, but it's the actual idea of being able to control stuff. That's the thing that bothers me. If this instrument doesn't sound good using pitch vibrato as with my guitar, I wouldn't use it that way either, but yeah. So you can use pitch bend. It doesn't sound good, so I wouldn't use it. That's another thing. At least it works here. If we go to the synth category, I think there won't be really that much to be said about this. I mean, okay. So on the contrary, there is actually a lot to be said about the synth category and the MIDI guitar, and you can hear right away that something's up with the pitch settings. I would guess that the pitch settings are set to 12 for this. Yes, it is. That's why it sounds so strange. My guess is that even if I do like this, okay, let's take this as our vantage point for the discussion on MPE presets. If I would have had an MPE preset for this synth, I would be able to use it right out of the box. I would load that MPE preset, and whatever sort of bends I did on the individual notes, they would be recognized and sent to that particular note in these chords. And they wouldn't interfere with each other. Like in this case, if I want to use a vibrato or a pitch shift, if I have more than one note ringing, it get confused, and in the best case I can get all three to dive or react to my vibrato, or I get none of them. And this is actually a problem for me. I mean, it's not that far off to think that you might want to use a simple synth. In this case, I wouldn't be able to use any of these synths with less than having to go in and change. Could be playing a mono mode or legato mode instead, and I can do all kinds of stuff to mitigate from this, but I can't use pitch bend range because it sounds weird. Whereas it doesn't if I use something like Equator that are made for the Roli keyboard. These are examples that show that however I used the bends function together with these synths, it translates it easily into something that's understandable and usable. It's really expressive as well. It's not a hindrance like in this case where you have to think, okay, what do I need to do to fix this? You want to open an instrument and be inspired. That's my only sort of wish for the future factory library from Kontakt. What about Kontakt as an MPE player? There aren't too many of the libraries out there, so I've invested in Slate Ash's Aura and Colors. It's a combined preset collection of some 160 presets, I think. This is an MPE container for Kontakt that seems to work fairly well. I've had to sort of ease into it because its UI isn't like any other UI. It's a lot of different symbols that aren't used necessarily every time. Some of the symbols in a matrix that you'll see are referring to the symbols that are used with, say, the Roli keyboard and the MPE parameters like strike and press and stuff like this slide. And I'll start just with working with the patch. And I'm thinking of this as sound design, and as the name Auras sort of imply, I actually see it even more figuratively, I think. I'm working with these sounds as a surrounding sound around the core of the other sound that I'm using. So I'm having a swam sax in the middle, and in this case I have a preset that's called a replica Oboe fizzy. So you all know what it sounds like when we're using an Oboe on a string and start vibrating and perhaps touching frets. might be something, and we have 160 sort of presets, and they all have different characters, so it could be something like this. And there really are a lot of ways to connect any sort of controller that you have. So this is, in that sense, an ideal instrument in my view, in that you can control most of the parameters in this instrument with some sort of detail. This is specifically made, I think, for the Roli keyboard, really. But when Kontakt gets hold of this, they are thinking of this as, okay, you can use this with a keyboard and a mod wheel and a pitch wheel, but you won't get the most out of it, because with the keyboard you have stuff like the individual pitch exactly like you do with a guitar. So let's go to the Auras. This was from the color section. Okay, so this is, I think, a good representation of what I'm looking for. These sort of bendy presets that I can have as backgrounds for any sort of lead voice that I'm playing over it. But the fine thing with this is, if I'm using, like in this case, a swam saxophone, it's going to be following that swam saxophone, in that the swam saxophone is also an MPE instrument. So all the minute details in bending will follow each other, and if that's a preference, I mean, it could actually be a detriment as well. You perhaps want to have a static pitch for the thing that you're playing over, so that you can create tensions by bending. But if you want it to be like I'm using it here, like where I'm using the AltoSax as the center point, and this other sound with the MPE preset, like it's Aura, it should actually follow it everywhere it goes. So I can use these sort of bendy chords to get an internal tension into the chord while I'm playing the lead still. This is one of the things that I really like about this, how you can create this sort of internal tension while playing just a simple melody. And you can always create layers and go in afterwards, and per design create tension with altering some sort of details in your DAW. But this is for the real-time action that I'm looking for, and you can create tension on the spot while playing wherever you like. So that's the idea for me, to have MPE preset in the background, also when I'm playing an MPE instrument in the sort of foreground or in the center. So I think I've made my case here for these MPE presets to be included into the Kontakt catalog as we buy it. But before we go into this drawing any conclusions parts of this video, I want to show you two of those standout instruments that actually made this a pleasant experience for me. With the first one, it's the Electric Mint electric guitar. This is an instrument that sounded so beautiful, and I can only imagine what it would feel like playing with an MPE preset. The other instrument here is Noire piano, and it has this shimmering effects, exactly what I'm looking for with the MPE Auras stuff that I'm doing. So that part comes with it as I buy the actual instrument. In that sense, this was a perfect instrument for me as well. What conclusions can we draw from this very long video? With regard to those new instruments that comes in this second or this new library together with Kontakt 7, they're not really aimed at MIDI guitar. I would say they're pretty much done for a keyboard player, and I think that's a bit of a letdown. So I won't be recommending Kontakt 7 for any users that already have 5 or 6, asking is 7 a step up. I don't think it is. On the other hand, I would say that the Komplete series in itself, if you don't have anything, the Komplete series is of course a grand way to get into producing music. It's not at all a bad buy. But if you're a MIDI guitarist and you use MIDI Guitar 2 software, prepare to be fiddling a lot to make this work for you. This is what I'm saying. I hope this video has been somewhat informative, at least with regard to how it works for us MIDI guitarists with this particular software setup. I wouldn't be able to tell you even how it works together with any of the other hardware controllers. That's outside of the scope of this video. So this is only for those particular ones that are working with the MIDI Guitar 2 software that I know something about. So I've shown you some great sounding instruments, and I've also shown you instrument that actually doesn't even work. So you have the whole spectra here. It's up to you to decide if this is for you. Of course, I'm investing in this as I want to be having the latest software. Perhaps there are some advantages that I don't know about yet. I hope there's been something for you all to think about here, and I hope to see you in the next video. So till then, bye and sorry.